For those experiencing the Lord of the Rings trilogy for the first time, there are 3 fears about the outcome of the One Ring. First, we fear that Frodo will never reach Mount Doom in the land of Mordor. A whole lot of obstacles are in the way. Hordes of orcs, Nazgul, a rogue wizard, giant spider, even the lands themselves filled with the fallen warriors from the Second Age. And that is only in the movies. The books add Barrow-wights, Old Man Willow, and a couple of other minor antagonists. The odds are not in Frodo's favor. Any one of these obstacles could prevent the ring-bearer from reaching his destination. The second fear that we have is that someone might take the ring from Frodo. The lure of the One Ring's temptations are strong for those in proximity to it. It seems that Boromir will succumb to his temptations until he proves his valor by defending Merry and Pippin. His brother's film counterpart almost falls for the pull of the ring as well. It seems like almost everybody near that thing wants to take it. And there's also Gollum, who's been so twisted by the One Ring's power that he's been itching for his precious for decades. All he has to do is reach out and take it, and we're ever vigilant, watching him. The third fear is that Frodo himself will fall to the same temptation. Every time he puts the ring on, it gets harder and harder to take off. And we feel the weight of that tiny object dig deeper into Frodo's neck as the days go on. We also witness how much the ring tempts him as the story continues. And we've already seen that one person standing at the edge of Mount Doom fail to toss that vile object into the fire. Will history repeat itself? And while many will rightfully say that Samwise heroically carries Frodo along the way, the irony is that it's actually Gollum himself whose actions finally cause the ring's end. Gollum is the one who leads Frodo to the back in secret ways that few others would know. Sure, there's the whole plan that Shelob will eat Frodo and dispose of the ring, but without Gollum, that first fear would have been realized along the way. Sam and Frodo wouldn't have ever thought to go some other way than the Black Gate, and they would have failed. Also, Gollum is the one most on watch for the ring wraiths, especially when the Witch King and his orcs leave Minas Morgul, while Sam, Frodo, and Gollum are hiding in the dark crags just past the road. It's Gollum who makes sure that no one other than the Master or he touches the ring. Sure, Gollum does everything to try to take the ring, but we'll get back to that in a moment. And when it comes to the third fear, that Frodo will succumb to the ring's temptations, it's witnessing the effects of the ring's twisting of Gollum that keeps Frodo from going deeper, despite the temptations. If there's hope for freedom for Gollum, then there's also hope for Frodo himself. And that hope can only be after the ring has been destroyed. And while Frodo does finally fall to the ring's pull, just as he's about to destroy the thing, it is Gollum who keeps him from leaving Mount Doom with that ring. Right as our fears converge to a horrible moment, with Frodo and Gollum fighting over the ring, and Sauron realizing the ring's location, we fear that all is lost. But just then, it's the temptation of the ring itself that causes Gollum to become our ironic savior. Even as Gollum selfishly bites his precious off of Frodo's finger and dances in celebration, he falls into the fires of Mount Doom with the ring, thus destroying it. There are many heroes and saviors in the trilogy, many people who arrive just in time to save the day. But the ironic thing is that all of it would have been for nothing, if not for Gollum's actions. That creature, whom many consider to be vile, saved Frodo and all of Middle-earth from a worse fate. I'm not saying that we should call Gollum the hero of the whole story. No, he's still a villain, just as Sam says. But there was a purpose leading Bilbo to pity Gollum all those decades earlier, a part that Gollum still had to play, the part of the ironic savior. You might be asking, what's the point of this already lengthy introduction? Well, this idea of the ironic savior comes into play in 1 Samuel chapter 29, our passage for this sermon. As we've witnessed the theme of, despite the problems of this life and the human evil that brings them about, God's king will reign and bring restoration to his humble people. This theme has led our thoughts through the book of Samuel, and we've seen time and again that it's often God's pattern to do things in strange ways. A woman's cry to finally be a mother led her to give up her firstborn so that he could become the greatest prophet that Israel had ever known. A boy on an errand of finding his father's lost donkeys found himself being anointed the first king of the land. And the youngest and forgotten son of Jesse was called to become the most famous king Israel ever had. Irony is thick in the ways of God. I mean, we followers of Jesus can't deny that. Our ability to find spiritual life came through Jesus' death. The defeat of the cross led to the victory of the empty tomb. The last are made first, and the humble share the glory of our God. So it shouldn't surprise us when God works his will through ironic means, as we'll see him do through 1 Samuel chapter 29. For those experiencing the story of 1 Samuel for the first time, there are many fears. We've witnessed David say again and again that he shouldn't be the one taking Saul's life in his hands. Yet Saul's death is the only way that God's promise of making David king will ever happen. We saw David flee the land of Israel to become an undercover agent for God among the Philistines, among the enemies of God. A job that he did so well that Achish, the king of Gath, called David to fight on his side in the upcoming war between Israel and the Philistines. On the wrong side. And in the last chapter, we saw Saul cross over the battle lines in secret, to literally perform the crossing over that he metaphorically and spiritually had already done, and seek out a medium to raise Samuel, so that he could find out what God wanted him to do, though the answer wasn't what he wanted to hear. This upcoming battle would be his last, his and his sons. So here we are. David's marching with the enemy troops, and Saul is doomed to die in this battle. Those experiencing this story for the first time fear what will happen through this. Both men have found themselves on the wrong side of the battle, even though they're on opposite sides. Is this going to end up with David versus Saul, anointed versus anointed, or is something else going to happen? This is the beauty of the author's manner in building dramatic tension for us, and we see it all the more as the author reintroduces us to the ironic saviors of this story. 1 Samuel chapter 29, verses 1 to 5. Now the Philistines had gathered all their forces at Aphek, and the Israelites were encamped by the spring that is in Jezreel. As the lords of the Philistines were passing on by hundreds and by thousands, and David and his men were passing on in the rear with Achish, the commanders of the Philistines said, "What are these Hebrews doing here?" And Achish said to the commanders of the Philistines, "Is this not David, the servant of Saul, king of Israel, who has been with me now for days and years? And since he deserted to me, I have found no fault in him to this day." But the commanders of the Philistines were angry with him. And the commanders of the Philistines said to him, "Send the man back, that he may return to his place to which you have assigned him. He shall not go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he become an adversary to us. For how could this fellow reconcile himself to his Lord? Would it not be with the heads of the men here? Is this not David, of whom they sing to one another in dances? Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. The author starts this chapter, much like he did the last one, with an introduction of place. But more importantly for us, it gives us a time. While it would be easy for us to just skip past all the location names, what this tells us is that the author is going back in time. It's a little note, like 3 days earlier. See, the battle lines were drawn in the last chapter. The Philistines were about to attack. But in this chapter, the place names tell us that they haven't yet reached that line. They're not there yet. Saul's nighttime medium adventure hasn't happened when this scene here in chapter 29 occurred in history. The author builds the tension by leaving both David and Saul in trouble, only to then alleviate our fears about what's going to happen. He does this by letting Saul's narrative move on a little further in the timeline before returning back to David, and alleviates the younger man's troubles through this ironic savior. David had been conscripted into this war against Israel. Up until now, he'd been able to trick King Achish into thinking that he'd been attacking Israelite settlements. But right now, right when the ruse is about to let up, right when David and his men are asking their general, "Are we really about to go fight our own people?" Now is the moment that God secretly steps up to provide a savior for his chosen king, and it comes from the most unlikely of places. The Philistines were gathering their armies. The 5 kings of their 5 primary cities came together, showing off their resplendent fighters. And it seems that Achish was the last to show up, because right when the military parade drew to a close, the king of Gath rode right alongside Israelite mercenaries, David within sword's reach. The other kings and their commanders turned to one another with furrowed brows. What does Achish think he's doing? They rushed to the king of Gath and berate him for his stupidity. You're bringing Hebrew mercenaries when we're about to fight their own people? At this, Achish holds up his hands, defending the honor of David, the man who was actually deceiving him by reporting all of the deeds that David's supposedly been doing for him. Achish is like, this isn't just any Israelite, this is David, the great warrior. He used to be in the service of Saul, but now he's in mine. He's been with me for nearly 2 years now, and I have yet to find fault in him. He's become my greatest asset, like what he had been for Saul. Who else should I bring to this battle than the great General David? And then the other kings and commanders throw Achish's words right back at him. I mean, check out Achish's first quoted words in verse 3 and compare them to the first words in verse 5. Is this not David? They both say the same words to prove their point, but they don't mean the same thing. The king of Gath meant that David is a great warrior and will aid the Philistines well in this war. But the rest of the Philistine leadership expect him to become an adversary. The word they use in verse 4 for adversary is actually the term where we get the word Satan. They reject the chosen king of God by calling him Satan. I mean, they're expecting a knife in the back any second now. And they're not the Lord's anointed, so David wouldn't have any reservation with assassinating them. They're fine with Achish having this great Israelite warrior among his own concerns. They even tell the king of Gath to send David back to wherever he had placed the man's station. Just send him home for right now. He's not coming with us. It's not like they told Achish to boot David out of any service to the Philistines at all. No, he could still do those services, but fighting this war against the Israelites? Ain't happening. What they saw was an opportunistic warrior who could get just as easily back into the good graces of Saul by slaying this whole council of Philistine leaders. How could they know that this whole thing wasn't just some elaborate plan by Saul and David for just this thing? It's better to be sure that everyone on our side is actually on our side than to have one more mercenary company. The paranoia of the other Philistine leaders led them to do David a favor. God used it and them to prevent David and his men from having to fight their fellows. Little did they know that they were doing the work of God in this moment. Because if any of the Israelites saw David on the other side of the battle lines, do you think any of them would immediately turn around and accept his kingship over them? The guy who just slaughtered some of our own people is not going to be our king. The families of every Israelite slain that day would stare at David with hatred, not loyalty. It would have been better for David to have just assassinated Saul than to reach that point. But because the Philistines pointed at David and said, "You know the 10,000s that this man struck down, as the songs they love to sing say? They were us. They were 10,000 Philistines. Our people were the ones who tested David's mettle. Our blood drenched the battlefield because of him. Where do you think he got that sword from, huh? Remember Goliath, your city's old hero? We will not fight beside him." And so because they said that, David wouldn't have to face the same argument among his own people. Ironically, their fears allowed God to alleviate David's fear of having to face his own people. They became ironic saviors because this one decision could have changed the course of history for the Israelite people. The Philistines, the people who epitomize evil in this book, kept David from being seen as a villain by his own people. And what's more, Achish, the king who kept pushing David to that terrible end, instead turns and apologizes to David with utmost humility. 1 Samuel chapter 29, verses 6 to 11. Then Achish called David and said to him, "As the Lord lives, you have been honest, and to me it seems right that you should march out and in with me in the campaign. For I found nothing wrong in you from the day of your coming to me to this day. Nevertheless, the Lords do not approve of you. So go back now, and go peaceably, that you may not displease the lords of the Philistines." And David said to Achish, "But what have I done? What have you found in your servant from the day I entered your service until now, that I may not go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king?" And Achish answered David and said, "I know that you are blameless in my sight as an angel of God. Nevertheless, the commanders of the Philistines have said, 'You shall not go up with us to battle.' Now then, rise early in the morning with the servants of your lord who came with you, and start early in the morning and depart as soon as you have light." So David set out with his men early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines. But the Philistines went up to Jezreel. Dejected, walking slowly, probably with a sigh, Achish makes his way over to David, pulls at his beard a little bit. There's some bad news coming. At least he sees it that way. He shakes his head and calls David close. And notice that in the entire chapter, the only mentioning of God's presence comes from the mouth of a Philistine. The epitome of evil in the book is the only one to speak the name of the great and mighty God of Israel. He swears by the name of Yahweh that he wishes the news he was about to give was good. Little does he know that this bad news actually was good news to David, but that's beside the point. "As Yahweh lives, I thought you'd be a great addition to our troops. You're a fine warrior. I have seen time and again that you are loyal to me. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just the other kings. They don't see you the way that I do. They're afraid that you'll turn on them. I know better, of course. They just don't want you fighting with us this time. I'm sorry. Go home, in peace. There's not a problem between us, all right?" I can only imagine David's mind at this moment. How many thoughts had to be going on in his head during the march so far? or been whispered to him by his own men. The stress would have been killing me, to be sure. He was likely in the middle of coming up with a plan. Definitely had been praying to God about this. Lord, I know you can do great and amazing things. Well, right now one of those times could really be used to show up. Give me wisdom, guidance, something, anything. And then right in the middle of that silent prayer, up comes Achish. He'd gone over to the other kings to talk, and he's coming back with obviously bad news. Maybe they're sending us to the very front lines. Maybe we'll be the ones that they force to fight first. They want to kill us off with our own people. I never should have gone over to the Philistines. But as the words pour out of Achish, I'm sure it was all that David could do to remind himself to look displeased, disappointed, devastated that he was being rejected as a warrior. Any other action would prove his disloyalty to the king of Gath. And so David falls back on the types of things that he said back when he had to leave Saul's service. Get back into that emotional state. What is it that I've done? I don't understand. I've been beneficial to you. I've done all that you asked, and you're sending me away. David lays it on just thick enough to be believable. Also notice in verse 8 how he never says that he wanted to go to war with Achish. Instead, he speaks of going to war against the enemies of his lord, the king. It hits that edge of truthfulness, but also giving Achish just enough to believe the lie of his own understanding. Those of us looking at the moment just sit here, shaking your heads at awe, at how ironic all of this is. David having to look here disappointed, while the guy he's been tricking sings of his loyalty, and sends him away from a battle that David was trying to figure out how to get out of. This is one of those only God could have pulled that off moments. There is no way that this could have been anything else. The author of life wrote it too neatly to be anything other than authorial intent. And then Achish again apologizes for this mistreatment of him by the Philistine leaders in verse 9. And as he continues into the next verse, Achish tells David to go with his men in the morning, early, as soon as there is light. What's the importance of that? Why leave in the morning and not right now? Wouldn't the Philistine leaders have preferred David to leave right then and there? Was Achish trying to make sure that David had plenty of light to travel by? Or was there something else? Remember the end of the last chapter? What was a detail about the time when Saul left the medium that might be connected to the time of day when David leaves the enemies of God? Saul and his servants rose to leave while it was still night. He was heading, or will be heading because the timelines hadn't yet reached that point, to his death with the darkness of night clinging to him. But David and his men rise to leave in the earliest of morning light. He was heading away from the trouble because of the ironic saviors used by the invisible hand of God, going away from the time of Saul's demise, because he, David, was faithful to Yahweh. The God we serve is incredible. I can't help but stand in awe of the means by which he brings restoration to his people. God can use those who stand opposed to him to bring his promise to fruition. He can use his enemies to make his plans happen, and use the rejection of his people to prove his guiding hand through it all. This isn't a promise of God always getting us out of tricky situations, especially those we've gotten ourselves into. But it is a moment that we can point to and say that this is the kind of God we serve, one who can use the most ironic of situations to bring about his promised good for us. Use those dark moments to reveal his beautiful light. Use the pain in our lives so that we can understand the depths of his love. Use the loss of everything we have on earth so that we can rejoice in the boundless riches of his heavenly grace. Ironic saviors that get us to the places God calls us to, through the dangers of life, and keep us from falling into the worst of temptations. Living through it all doesn't feel that fun. It's only once we've made it home that we realize how perfectly ironic that salvation is. Like I said in the intro, we followers of Jesus live lives of irony. Sinner saints who live as citizens of a heavenly kingdom that is both now but not yet, all the while living in this fallen world of darkness, claiming to have seen the light. Because we serve a God who took on human flesh and died to give us life. So how could we expect anything less than God using the darkest of our moments to shine his light through them and through us? How could we expect to not be living sacrifices who must daily lay ourselves down on the altar, nail our old selves to the cross as we put on the new self? That's the God we serve, the God who lifts the faces of the humble so that he can bestow unto us his glory, the God whose plan and work continue despite the problems of this life and the human evil that brings them about. Come to him, bow and worship the one who will surprise us with ironic saviors.